it gives me a big pleasure and honor to welcome you all for this important event under the aegis of FIAM Biomedical Ethics Center. It's a great pleasure to know that a lot of people have logged in of different strata of society, and are interested in knowing much of this. First of all, must thank our His Eminence Oswald Cardinal Gracious, President of the CBCI and member of the task force appointed by Holy Father to supervise the new law promulgated by Pope Francis concerning sexual abuse, entitled "You Are the Light of the World." Cardinal has done a lot of work in this area, and one of the most important work is starting the St. Joseph Safeguarding Center at the Eucharistic Building to sensitize, bring awareness, prevention, and reconciliation. It's a fourfold process which was started on the 8th of September 2021, called the Tutela Minorum. Recently, I'm so happy that the effort taken by our academic dean of the center, Dr. Anukant Mital, and his team, who is going to present to us this webinar, has taken efforts to put this in order, which we wanted to have it some time back. And I hope this will be a small feather in the work of the center and add to the work of the Cardinal, who is our patron. Recently, the sexual offenses on children and minors are on the rise, and not only in one part of India, but from different parts of India, and it looks like it's like just like the tip of the iceberg sitting over, and lot yet to come because of the media bringing out this in different ways. But a lot of efforts are being put down to not to bring it to the surface, maybe right starting from the family, the person itself. There is at the school level, the police level, the political level, and which we have seen in different ways in India. And how do we respond to this and prepare our future generation not to get affected by it, but to sensitize to the same, will be the aim of this seminar today. And I now hand over these proceedings to Dr. Susan Sodder, the co-host, who will introduce the speakers in the order and continue the proceedings. Over to Dr. Susan Sodder. Dr. Susan Sodder is the medical director of Holy Spirit Hospital, renowned gynecologist, our board of trustees, and a name very well sought in gynec and obstetric practice. Over to Dr. Susan Sodder.
Thank you for this very kind introduction, Dr. Nicholas. I have to say this about you, and people who don't know you. You're a person who wears many hats. You're a stellar performer in the field of orthopedics. You head our department at Holy Spirit Hospital as the chief of the orthopedic department for the last 2 decades. You have been the chief editor of the Indian Association of the Journal of Orthopedics. You are now currently the editor-in-chief of Clinical Orthopedics. You have been the past president of the Orthopedic Association of Bombay and the past president of the Indian Arthroscopy Association also. You are a humble person who associates himself with many causes. You had your wife behind you and a great support to you. We also remember Noella very fondly today. And I can't be more grateful for you to have this session because it's a topic very dear to my heart. The three speakers who are going to be addressing the topic are people who've dealt with mental health issues for many, many decades. Also involved in this program is the Dean of the FIAM Center, of the FIAM Biomedical Ethics Center, Dr. Anukant Mital, who happens to be a classmate of mine from JJ Hospital. We've known each other from the first year of medical school. Anukant has been the past head of department of the Rajiv Gandhi Medical College, and he's also currently the chairperson, the unit head, Western India, the UNESCO chair. Anukant, there couldn't be anyone more eloquent about this topic. And I'd like you to introduce the speakers or contribute to this topic in whatever way you feel is going to be most appropriate. Over to you, Anukant.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Susan.
Yeah, thank you, Susan. I hope I'm audible to all. Hello.
Very much. Go ahead.
Right. Okay, this actually, I can't take all credit for this program. This program was conceived of by the Board of Trustees, and Dr. Susan came forward and said that she would like to be part of it and help organize it. So here we are. This was much before this whole thing has blown up in India and Bombay, especially in Badlapur and other places. Child sexual abuse is very common and very rampant. In fact, that is one of the reasons why the so important Pocso Act was enacted. And it is very stringent, very clear, and very methodical. The rules, regulations of discovery, notification, procedures to follow after notification or reporting of the crime, plus the punishment, have no gray areas. They are very cut and clear. And this allows for a more robust action being taken in child abuse cases. Because in the past, I had with social workers and juvenile justice officers, judges asking me that since the victim was a boy, was the Pocso Act available? Was it applicable? So this act has made it very clear that there are certain things that are very clear. And to make these things clearer, we've got three eminent, very eminent people who have been working with children, especially with children who have been sexually abused, children who are at risk of being abused. They're working in schools, they're working with children, with parents, and NGOs and organizations, not only in raising awareness, but also creating a sense of safety for the children and an environment of safety. The first speaker I think we would be starting with is Dr. Avinash D'Souza, very eminent psychiatrist. In fact, you will see him, if you follow him on Facebook, you will see that almost 3 to 4 days a week, he's giving lectures, meeting parents, meeting social workers, meeting children, meeting psychologists and psychiatrists, and helping them deal with school counseling, school therapists, children who are in school, etc. Then we have Dr. Sheryl, who is also a very eminent psychiatrist in the Western region. She's at Holy Spirit, she's at Hiranandani Pawai, and has a roaring practice of her own, but she is and I'm very proud to say that I was her undergraduate teacher, but she is an excellent speaker and very knowledgeable about Pocso. And of course, to round it all, we have at the end the clinical psychologist who will talk to us about the trauma the victims face and how do we handle them and how do we help them. So I hand over the mic now to Dr. Avinash to start his talk. We'll have the question and answers after all the three speakers. Yeah.
Am I audible?
Very much, Dr. Avinash.
Yes, okay. Sharon, just make the slide full screen. Yeah, okay. So, my job today evening here is to give everyone a brief overview of the Pocso Act. And what's very important is
Avinash?
that, yes. Hello. Okay. My job today evening is to give everyone an overview of the Pocso Act and why this act is so important, why it is so relevant, why it matters. And if you look at uh, child sexual abuse, there was an era prior to Pocso and there was an era after Pocso. Now, prior to Pocso, the uh, child abuse cases used to go on for years, following which uh, children would even become adults and the matter would still be in court. But POXO changed that all, saying that the act must, the case must finish in a year and a half from the time of filing. So that was a very big change that POXO brought about. Now, though the POXO Act says 1 year, sometimes it takes up to 1.5, 2 years, but still it's a big change compared to earlier cases that used to go on for 10 to 15 years. And very often, halfway through the case, one party would drop off, that is the child. Next slide, please. So the POXO Act is a very important act because India is the home to the largest percentage of children in the world. 42% of children are below 18. It is one of the biggest countries in the world that is battling the evil of child sexual abuse. We know that. And the POXO Act was formulated because it was the only act in the country made for a very specific reason, that is the child sexual abuse problem, and it overrides all other state and central laws. So if you file something under the POXO Act, you can't get relief under any other act because the POXO Act overrides all other laws. That's the most beautiful part about the act, that no other law can bring down the provisions of the POXO Act. The POXO Act is above any police act, above any other criminal act, above any other civil law. So it overrides all other laws in cases of child sexual abuse. Next slide. Now, the act defines a child as anyone below the age of 18. It includes, um it lists all forms of uh, sexual assault. Now, what is very important to understand is that they are very clear about child sexual assault here. So it includes not only touching behavior, not only sexual assault. So not only just penetrative sexual assault where, say, a rape happens, but even touching a child, even sometimes non-touching a child. They're very clear that if a person undresses in front of a child, if a person shows a child pornographic material, if a person uh, sends links to the child which are of adult sites, if the child is forced to see something he's uncomfortable with, if the child is even touched maybe on the face, head, may not be on the genital areas, but the child is uncomfortable, if the child is forced to undress in front of people he doesn't like, all these things come under the ambit of child sexual abuse. It's not only touching. It's like a lot of people may claim I didn't even touch the child. No, but even if you did anything as lewd and bad as what I have mentioned, it comes under the child sexual abuse radar. And child sexual abuse has been defined very clearly. Next slide. Now, what is so great about POXO? Why are we talking about POXO? Because it is a specific law and it is for a specific crime. So it is one single law very well defined. It's a short law. There's no big sections to it. And it is with regard to a specific crime, that is child sexual abuse. You have specific POCSO courts which are there for this, so that you don't have to be mixed with the other courts. And there are trained personnel who are going to manage the child. So police officers are supposed to be trained in handling children with child sexual abuse. And we also have other people who are trained. That is, the lawyers, the judges are trained in interviewing these children. It is a very child friendly law. So if a child files a complaint, the child has to be interviewed in an environment that the child wants. So if the child says, I want to go, the police officer to come to my home, a lady police officer has to go and interview the child in plain clothes and not in the school uniform. If the child says that, I want to be seated in a garden and interviewed, you have to do that. If the child says, I don't want anyone else to, probably, so that kind of a thing is something that has to be done. What is also very, very important is that the child uh, is paramount. Safety of the child is paramount. The child can have any other adult seated with him or her when the interview is being taken. The child can also, uh, if the police station where the case is filed does not have a female officer, they are supposed to call a female officer from another police station, but it has to be a lady police officer. In court, the cases do not get prolonged. They remain for 1.5 year max or max 2 years. The punishment is very severe. So, starting with 10 years and then going on ahead to even life imprisonment. And the crimes are defined in detail. So, the POCSO Act is available online, and the crimes are defined very much in detail. The what are the crimes and what are the punishments. Next slide, please. So, as I said, you have a specific court. So the matter goes there. In fact, you have daily hearings at times or alternate day hearings, but the matter finishes fast. The second issue is, even media guidelines are there in POCSO with regard to how they are supposed to report. They are not supposed to mention the name of the child, location of the child, school of the child. They are not supposed to post photographs. The reporting has to be done very sensitive. And sensationalism of child sexual abuse is something that is not permitted. What is also very important is compulsory reporting, which is a section that most mental health professionals and other professionals feel a little uncomfortable about. That why should we report mandatorily if the parents and children don't want to report? The whole aim of this section of compulsory reporting is so that the offenses don't repeat. If I'm an offender and I have committed a crime and you report me and I get arrested, I will not commit offenses again. But if I'm not reported, I will continue to commit offenses. So it's very important that compulsory reporting happens. The Act also very clearly mentions that if someone goes and reports the matter to the police is not supposed to call him again and again and trouble him. So the biggest worry is, if I report, I'll be called again and again. No, but that shouldn't happen. The POCSO Act also talks about false reporting of cases. So sometimes if someone wants to take out their anguish, anger, vindictiveness on a particular person and puts a false POCSO case and it is proven false, there is a punishment for the person who's put a false case also. So you can't just misuse the act to sort of trouble someone. I work in schools, and schools have to be very aware of the POCSO Act. In fact, there are guidelines for the schools about implementation of the POCSO Act. A POCSO committee is in place, has to be in place in school, where you have one legal person, you have one parent, the principal, one teacher, and one common man that is part of the committee. Students have to be given awareness about POCSO and their rights. There has to be a POCSO box put up in the school where students can anonymously put in their complaints or with their names. The POCSO committee looks at that complaint and then takes action based on that. All teachers have to be made aware and trained about the POCSO Act. And they have to sign a declaration that they are aware, and if anything goes wrong, they are aware of the consequences. all schools have to put this into provision. Few of them have and few have not. So the ones that have not have to be very importantly to put it into provision. And in case schools want any help with regard to this, myself, Dr. Sheryl, Pragya, we're all available to help the school if needed. Police have to take action. They are answerable. They cannot say that we didn't have time to investigate, we couldn't do it. It is one act that says that the police has to file FIR and take action immediately. Person has to be arrested. It's non-bailable. And till the court says that the person is not guilty. Next slide. They are very, very clear about sexual assault, which is penetrative. The punishment is far higher. Non-touching punishment is different. But what is very important is they have a category called aggravated penetrative sexual assault. And aggravated sexual assault is a category when it is done by people who are in a position of power and who have ideally to protect the child. So if child sexual abuse happens by a hostel warden, a special educator, a teacher, a professional who's looking after the child, somebody in authority, in a remand home, that person directly there is a 12 to 10 to 15-year imprisonment, because it has happened by a person who's in a position of power on whom the child is dependent and has taken advantage of his or her position to cause the sexual assault. Pocso is a gender neutral law. It is the same for boys and girls. It has no separate provisions. Next slide. Even sexual harassment of a child comes under Pocso. Even for that matter, if the child is shown pornographic material, it comes under Pocso. It is very, very important to understand that anybody who indulges in child pornography is also liable to be prosecuted under Pocso. If tomorrow your laptop, mobile phone, etc., you're found in possession of child pornographic material, you're also likely to be prosecuted under Pocso. Though you may not have sent it anywhere, though you may not have done anything, you can't have child pornographic material on your devices. Next slide. What is so great about Pocso? It also takes care of special children. So children who are intellectually impaired, autism, etc., the child is interviewed with the help of a special educator. If the child is hearing impaired, then a sign language interpreter has to be there. The child is never called to the police station again and again, never called to the court again and again. This is something which is a beautiful provision of Pocso Act. Even if the child comes to court, the accused is not to be present in court, so that the child is not intimidated by the presence of the accused. The trial is done in camera. That is, people are not allowed into the trial. So you don't have a court which is full. Only the child, only everyone else is supposed to come there. So this is something which is very, very important. What also matters is that the accused is not allowed in the courtroom, particularly when all this happens. Because what happens as a result is that if the accused is allowed in the court, there will be a constant fear on the means of the child to sort of cause a problem. Next slide. Mandatory reporting is a must. This is very, very important for schools, because if the child if they don't report mandatorily, there's an 6-month imprisonment for non-reporting. What also happens is that 6-month mandatory reporting is there. Just give me 1 minute, please. So the mandatory reporting has to happen. The school cannot say we won't report. So the school has to have somebody legal who reports the offense. That offense, the school has to report even if the parent says we don't want to report. Later, whether the parent follows up the case or not is a parent's problem, but the school has to report. Sadly, the principal is liable. Principal gets arrested if the school doesn't report. Next slide, please. This is very important that if any child or parent misuses the Pocso Act to wrongly defame a person, including the child, this is something that uh, is punishable, which is a very important aspect. The onus on proving the crime is not put onto the child. The onus of proving innocence is also there on the for the accused. So this is very important. Next slide. State agencies have to train police, they have to train judiciary, they have to train the child protection machinery. Every school must have a POXO orientation program for the teachers. They should be made aware about child sexual abuse. Very, very important. And we are doing this. Sheryl, myself, other psychiatrists, we are doing POXO awareness programs in schools. Next slide. So, like I told you, the main thing about POXO is it's child friendly. The child has a lot of police protection during the procedure. Re-victimization of the child by calling the child again and again doesn't happen. There is a special court. Compensation, even monetarily, is provided to the child. It has to be disposed fast. Emergency medical treatment can be availed of. And the child, if afraid to go to court, can testify via video link also. So that provision is also there. Next slide. So 9 things to remember: that the child statement has to be recorded by a woman police officer not in uniform, at the child's home or any place where the child is comfortable. It has to be in the language spoken by the child and of the child. It has to be in the presence of a trusted adult, expert, interpreter, and or social worker. Medical examination of the child must happen within 24 hours in the presence of parents or trusted adults. If the child wants frequent breaks during the interview, that has to be provided. Audio video devices can be used for the interview. Recorded statement has to be read out loud to the child before the parents sign. And child and family must be given a copy of the statement, which is important. Next slide. So one has to adopt a supportive behavior towards child victims. So you listen to the case with patience whenever a child complains of any indication to you. Raise concerns with people close to the child. Go to the parents. Tell them this has happened. Call child line 1098 is the number you remember. Call them and they will help you out. Inquire that medical examination happens. Report immediately. And be sensitive when discussing the incident. Next slide. So if you look at a quick glance at steps, you take consent, you provide first aid. Medical examination has to be done of the child also, not only the accused. And evidence has to be handed over. This is done in the hospital by the forensic people or the gynac, and the psychiatrist may be present at that time. Next slide. So we have to say no to child sexual abuse. You can go online and report. There's a government helpline. 1098 is a child helpline. And you have to have a POXO e-box button in the National Child Protection, whatever agency, where you just go click that and you can report there. Next slide. Like I said, POXO is now an integral part of school mental health. Child abuse is different from any trauma because it continues for years. There are many children who have undergone abuse for 4 years, 3 years, 2 years, 10 years. They can report under POXO at any point of time. It doesn't mean abuse has to happen now. And therefore, the child has a right to seek help when needed. Tell the school, even if the child says I was abused 2 years back, he can come now and report. They cannot say it happened 2 years back, forget about it. Next slide. Yes, thank you so much. And if there's any questions, I'll be there for the question answer session. This is an overview of the Act. I think Sheryl will discuss cases. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Avinash, for such a informative, succinct presentation. bringing about all the nuances involved. About the 9 things to remember in POSCO, and the helpline 1098 in case of situations.
I think, can we invite Dr. Sheryl to begin her talk? Dr. Sheryl, are you there?
Yes, ma'am. Can you see me and hear me?
Yeah, Dr. Sheryl, quick introduction to you. You're a consultant here at Holy Spirit Hospital at Hiranandani Hospital. You do immense amount of work at charitable institutions. I know at Mother Teresa's home, you volunteer so ever often. You're a motivational speaker, life coach. You're an avid reader. You had a brief stint as the secretary of the Bombay Psychiatric Society, and you were an executive member of the St. Luke's Medical Guild. And you're an organizing committee member of the annual National Conference of Private Psychiatrists held in November of 2019 here in Mumbai. Sheryl, there can't be anyone more eligible to talk about this topic, because you deal with a wide variety of cases and you have such a huge practice. So I'm looking forward to hearing from you. Over to you, Sheryl.
Thank you so much, ma'am. So since we have understood the law, I mean, Avinash has given us an overview of what POXO means. Let's, as a group, look at some situations which we probably would be facing. My slides are visible, right? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, we can see them.
Yes. We have to understand that safety and security of children don't just happen. We have to invest in the safety of our children, and we owe it to our children because they are the most vulnerable citizens in our society, and we owe it to them to have a life which is free of violence and fear. And if you look at the various statistics regarding sexual abuse in India, children who have faced some amount of sexual abuse, about 53%. And children who report having been sexually abused, 6%. So there is such a discrepancy in the number of kids who would have probably faced abuse as compared to those who have been able to report it, right? And 50% of the cases is where the abuser was in a relationship of trust with the child. So somebody known to the child. And there has been an increased surge in sexual violence against children from 2016 to 2022. And again, this is what we are observing, this surge that we are talking about is only the tip of the iceberg. These are only the cases that are coming up in media or getting reported. There are thousands and thousands of children who are not able to report. And when we see them as mental health professionals, and as Pragya will talk about trauma, when we see them as adults and they talk about sexual abuse as children, it really makes us question ourselves as a society. Where are we heading? A lot of cases, 14-year-old girl from Kerala says that her father has constantly been sexually abusing her. A man in Madhya Pradesh arrested for abusing his 2 minor daughters. Every day, right, you would read something in the paper about girls 10, 12, gang raped, murdered, hung. And this is just a fraction of the cases. And now, very, very recently for us in Mumbai, the unfortunate Badlapur case. So what do we know about the Badlapur case? Anybody? If one person could just put your hand up and you could just then unmute yourself and tell us, what do you know about the Badlapur case? I think people are not comfortable talking about it. So I'll just give you a a brief about what happened. There were these two girls, 4-year-olds, in a school at Badlapur, and they were sexually abused by a person who was working there for almost 12 days. So the first child went and reported it. And after that, she went and told her parents. Her parents came and approached the school, and then the second child reported it. Why did the case become a big situation? How did all of us realize what was happening? Is because when the parents went to the school and spoke about what happened, the school authorities were not willing to take action. When they went to the police station, the police officers were not ready to file an FIR. And as now we know, after Avinash has spoken about how it's mandatory for us to report. So there was a glaring problem right in the beginning, right? And then when there was a public outcry, there was a blocking of railway tracks for a day is when the higher authorities put in pressure and the case got recorded. So what went wrong? We have to understand it is mandatory for all to report a medical legal case in a case of sexual abuse. And the failure of reporting could result in 6 months imprisonment or a fine under Section 21 of the Pocso Act. And the reporting can be done at any time since the Act. So if you know about it 10 days later, you know about it 6 months later, if you find out about it, it's mandatory for you to report, especially if you are a school principal, a teacher, a person who is in authority to protect the child. And if you fail to do that, even if you say, oh, I didn't know about the act, there is no excuse. You will be punished. Whom do we report to? Under POSCO, there are special police cells. So they're called Special Juvenile Police Unit. And any individual must report the case to the police. And then it's taken under the Special Juvenile Police Unit. Examination must be done within 24 hours. And if a center doesn't have the facilities for examination, then they will refer them to a higher center. As individuals in society, I want you to remember this and maybe take a screenshot of this page, and you can even report anonymously. You can use, like Avinash said, use the child helpline. Remember the number 1098. You just have to call up that number, and it's very, very smooth. Yesterday, Avinash and I were doing at part of a school mental health program, and we were talking about POSCO, and there was a lady who shared her experience of using the child line number of 1098, and she said it became so easy. She didn't have, nobody had to give any addresses, any details of any reporting, but all necessary actions were taken about saving and protecting that child. Now I want you to think about these questions and understand what among this is true and false. We usually think that children are usually abused by strangers, and that's false. Children are usually abused by people known to them. A child may be at fault for encouraging sexual activity. No, false. Child victims of sexual abuse will have physical signs of abuse. Again, false. There may be so many instances where there may not be any physical signs of the abuse. Oh, child sexual abuse doesn't happen in my society. Oh, it doesn't happen in my home. It doesn't happen in my particular strata of society. No. Child sexual abuse happens across socioeconomic strata, right from the lower socioeconomic to the high-rise buildings. Children who are being abused would immediately tell their parents no. Sometimes children are very, very apprehensive and scared about sharing what happened to them, to their parents. Normal appearing, well educated, middle class people don't molest children. Again, false. So I want to talk about one particular case. This is Miss K, a 5-year-old who was sexually abused by her neighbor. And her parents immediately took her to the police station and FIR was lodged, but the procedure took very long. The reporting officer was busy. He kept on asking them questions. The child was made to sit in the police station overnight. She kept telling her mother, "Dar lag raha hai, ghar chalo." But every time the mother asked the officer, he said, "Police formalities take time." He then asked one of his colleagues to take the child to the nearest government hospital for the checkup, while he finished taking details from the mother. The girl was crying and didn't want to leave the mother, but he pacified her, saying examination had to be done within 24 hours and he will bring her mother there shortly. So, if you look at the act and look at what happened here, the chronology of events that happened, there were so many loopholes and things that went wrong and that didn't happen according to the Pocso Act. What does the Pocso say? Like I'm reiterating what Avinash said, the police has to file the FIR immediately. So in this situation, the police officer should have kept everything aside, called a female police officer and spoken to the child. The moment the child started feeling uncomfortable, he should have made the child uncomfortable, taken her maybe back home or maybe to a situation or place where she was comfortable. And the mother had to accompany the child. He could not keep the mother in the center and then send the child with somebody else for his examination. Again, very, very clear rules about how media should behave, how an NGO should behave. So this is a bird's eye view of what POCSO says. There is a special juvenile police unit. There are special courts. We have a district child protection unit and a CWC, NGOs, laypersons, medical services. Everything is well defined under POCSO. So what are these child-friendly procedures? At night, no child can be detained in the police station. The statement of the child to be recorded as spoken by the child. Frequent breaks for the child during trial. The child not to be called repeatedly to testify. This was another case. This is Master L. He's an 8-year-old boy who lives in a chawl. One night he came from the bathroom very scared. He confided in his elder brother, who was 16 years old, that about a man who caught him in the bathroom, pulled down his pants and penetrated him from behind. He said he didn't see him as he ran away soon after, but he was tall and dark and had an ugly scar on his face. His brother surprisingly revealed a similar episode that had happened to him when he was younger. But he said the police did not accept male abuse as a crime. And this is where POCSO comes into play. So the earlier we had IPC, where children above 15 years of age were not included. There were no special units. Only penetrative act was accepted. It excluded males, and there were no clear guidelines for stakeholders. Cases took forever, and the onus was on the victim to prove that he or she had been abused. POCSO changed that. So it can go up to a child who is less than 18 years of age. There are special police and courts. It includes all type of crimes, including pornography, like Avinash specified. Includes male sexual assault. So it's gender neutral. And it defines role for all the stakeholders, including teachers, principals, school, society. And gives 1 year to depose cases. Now, this is a googly case. This is Mrs. Q. She's a 23-year-old teacher who came to the OPD for treatment of depression. On detailed probing, it was discovered that she was working in a daycare center where she had accidentally kissed a 10-year-old on his lips. He was a very cute boy who resembled her fiancé. She kissed him again a few days later. Subsequently, he approached her twice and she didn't want to disappoint him. So she allowed herself to be kissed again by him twice. Now, his parents had complained to her daycare center and her job and reputation were at stake. Also, her fiance's family response was worrying her. What would we think? Do you think POCSO applies here? Yes. Here, what we would give it fall under aggravated sexual assault. So, a teacher who's supposed to protect the child. So, any person who's in a position of power where It is the right to protect that child. If that individual has committed any kind of unnecessary act, then it's aggravated sexual assault and reporting is mandatory here. So we're not concerned whether she's feeling guilty, whether she's feeling sorry for the act, whether it happened accidentally, it comes under Pocso. This is Miss M, 14-year-old, referred from the gynecology department for 3 months of amenorrhea. I mean, she didn't get her periods. She was pregnant. On repeated questioning, she mentioned about the sexual abuse which was ongoing by her uncle for the last few months. And everybody was angry with her because she had not mentioned what had happened earlier. And we wonder, why is it that children don't come and let us know what went wrong? So why does a child not disclose the abuse? Sometimes a child does not know what is happening to them is normal or not. It does not, child sometimes does not have the words to speak out. The abuser sometimes is a known person and the child does not want to get them in trouble. So it could be a very close family member. So the child says, okay, if I mention this, it might break my family or may get my family into trouble. The abuser has told the child to keep it a secret or will threaten the child. The child sometimes feels that no one will believe him or her. The abuser can bribe or threaten the child. Sometimes the child thinks that you already know. So when we see certain children, they'll say, oh, I thought that my mother knew what was going on, or my parent knew what was going on and they were quiet about it. It causes significant mental trauma to the child. The child feels very, very powerless. A feeling of powerlessness, anger, anxiety, fear. Can you imagine somebody who's very close to the child? Somebody who's supposed to protect the child, if that person is indulging in an act that is so grievous, the child is going to be so scared, can develop various phobias, nightmares, have difficulty concentrating, flashbacks, low self-esteem and confidence. Sometimes we see children who have come to us for different reasons. They would come to us saying that the child is not doing very well academically. The child has become very aloof and quiet, not interacting with anybody. And when we kind of talk to that child in detail is when we realize that, oh, there was this sexual abuse which had happened to the child. We have to think about or look at childhood sexual abuse accommodation syndrome, where many a times there are certain things that the child undergoes. So sometimes there's secrecy, helplessness. After some time, he feels trapped and starts accommodating for the abuser. And then sometimes a delayed disclosure. And sometimes even after disclosing, taking back what he or she has revealed. It's very, very common for abusers to retract back. The children who are abused to retract back. What could be the behavioral indicators? If the child talks about suicide or attempt to suicide, low self-esteem, regressive behavior, decline in school performance. We spoke about why it is compulsory and why we should report, right? Many times it becomes a vicious cycle. We report even when we know months later, because not only to stop the abuser, but to get the child help. Because sometimes this child who is abused and bullied will then become an abuser or a bullying. It kind of causes a vicious cycle. So a child can exhibit sexualized behavior. The child can have nightmares, sleep disturbances, irritability, eating disorders. Can sometimes develop sexually transmitted diseases. Irritation in the genital area, difficulty in walking and sitting, repeated urinary tract infections, and pregnancy. Long-term post-traumatic stress disorder, depression and suicide, when they have to get married or indulge in sexual activity, sexual dysfunctions, not able to assert anything, having interpersonal issues, poor body and self-image, can lead to drugs, alcohol, and issues in maintaining relationships. What can we as a society do? Report. So if one thing that you have to take away, and if you can remember just one thing from this whole seminar that if you understand is reporting is mandatory. And don't be overwhelmed when you hear about somebody or somebody comes and tells you. You have to be emotionally calmer. Don't get emotionally overwhelmed. Reassure the child that it is not his or her fault. Do not interrogate the child, or what happened, how did it happen. Reassure prompt steps will be taken. Do not make promises that you can't keep, and support the child. Parents go through a gamut of emotions. Sometimes they can have denial, they'll be angry, they feel betrayed by the family member. Sometimes they are confused, disbelief, guilt for allowing this to happen. Oh, why did I leave my child with this family member? Blaming. And sometimes a lot of conflicting emotions if the accused is a family member. And we have to kind of understand that from the parents' point of view. So sometimes there is a flip side to the law. This is something that we also have to take into consideration. Now, Miss R was brought to our OPD. This was a case shared to me by my friend who is a professor at Nair Hospital. And she talked about Miss R who was brought to our OPD registered under Pocso. She was 16-year-old and was caught with her boyfriend who was 19 years old. They had eloped for 1 week from Calcutta and gone to Delhi. They claimed to have gotten married in a temple, and they had regular intercourse during this period. The girl's parents lodged a missing persons complaint, and both were picked up in Delhi. The boy is behind bars now. The girl was very, very clear that she will be with him and him only. She says it was completely consensual and there was no force involved. But she was a minor and the boy was a major. So the POCSO applies here, but there's a flip side to this, right? Here, she's a child. So yes, POCSO applies. But you have to understand this sexually active adolescent behavior, we have not taken into consideration. There's a huge debate between 16 versus 18 as an age for consent. So we look at certain sometimes situations like this too, which can give us food for thought. We have to look at prevention. How do we prevent sexual abuse? Teach children accurate names of private body parts. Call it for what it is: vagina, penis, breast. Be comfortable using these words. Avoid focus exclusively on stranger danger. We always tell our children, oh, be careful of strangers, don't talk to strangers. We have to tell them about people at home. We have to tell them now even more about online predators, cyber safety, body safety, and difference between okay and not okay touches. Empower them to say no when they do not want to be touched. Don't allow your children, jao, uncle ke god mein baith jao, uncle hi to hai. No. Teach children to take care of their own private parts and educate children about the difference between good secrets and bad secrets. Maharashtra should have a zero tolerance policy towards sexual abuse, and all cases are taken up on priority. All of us have the power to stop child abuse. And POCSO is one of the very few but very clear and simple acts of law in our land. So rather than fear it, if we adhere to it, we can actually provide justice to many children who were earlier relatively unprotected. So stand up for children, as there is no excuse for child abuse. I must acknowledge my colleagues, Dr. Alka Subramaniam, who helped me with the slides, and Dr. Manjari Shenoy Deshpande. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you, Sheryl. That was an interesting and wonderful presentation. As usual, you do a good job of whatever topic you're given. And it was thought-provoking. You gave us many examples of different scenarios. And, I can't agree more with you because I'm a gynecologist. I so often see girls between the ages of 16, 15 for that matter, and above, sexually active. Some of them get pregnant, and then some of them want to keep the child also. And it becomes a really very difficult situation because the law says it is rape. The law says it's a POSCO Act. Everyone involved over there would serve a term over there. So this becomes really a gray zone where clear definitions need to be given about this particular aspect between 16 and 18, where more commonly teenagers are sexually active today. And this becomes something where two consenting young people, one goes behind bars and the other one has to be questioned, and both of them say that they are in a relationship, because the social media is so promiscuous these days that they think it's the norm rather than something that they're doing illegally or wrong. I would now like to invite our third speaker, Dr. Antao, here, or can I ask our third speaker to come on? I would be very happy to introduce our third speaker, Ms. Pragya Lodha. She's a practicing psychologist based in Bombay. She has a master's in clinical psychology and a doctorate in psychology. She's associated with 8 national as well as international organizations in various capacities as a clinical psychologist, to some a mentor, and to some on the advisory board of these industries and firms. She's an avid independent researcher with more than 150 academic and research publications. Ms. Lodha, I'd like you to be our next speaker, please. Do we have Ms. Lodha over here?
Dr. Susan?
Yes.
No, she's unable to log in. She's having a problem. Give us some time.
Okay, then can we continue the debate if till she's logging in, we can continue the topic, and if anyone has questions, I'd like to invite the questions at this point of time. I'll start with Dr. Avinash if he's here. Dr. Avinash, are you here?
Yes.
Avinash, we do know that reporting can take anywhere between, a day, 2 days, weeks, months, and years. To give you this example, I was going through a book written by Charles Spencer, the brother of late Diana Spencer. He's written a very interesting book called A Very Private School. And it entails his days in boarding school, where this was the upper crust of English society. And there were unspeakable sexual assaults on children in that school over there. So what happens to people like that, where there's no recourse to coming out in the open? You've come out decades later. He's in his 50s or maybe early 60s right now. And he's come out with a book which says these unspeakable sexual assaults happen on children in schools, as, as affluent as in the highest bracket of the English society. So you'll probably see people who go through life with these traumas, and how do you deal with that, and how do they get some justice from it?
So see, there are cases where we've had this issue that people come to us, let's say in therapy, also many years later, and they are now facing the abuse, and what do you call? Uh, they say this happened 20 years back when I was small, but now that uncle probably who did it, or the relative who did it, is still alive and he's 80. But I want to go and hammer him or do something like that, or I want to, now I have the courage after so many years. So generally, I tell them that that is a very possible, I mean, thing. You can always go and do that if that gives you the pleasure. But I said, so they said that Pocso, I said, you're an adult now, so you can't file a case under Pocso per se. You can only file a criminal case against the individual or whatever. So what we tell them is that uh, even if tomorrow, let's say, they go and do something to that individual or malign him or whatever, how does it help them ease the pain? So we focus more from a psychological perspective at dealing with the trauma, and we tell them that yes, if you feel you want to come out to your family, do that, because it's very important that that is sort of done. It's very important that has to be worked upon. There's also a whole issue that their whole anger, all those things have to be managed, and many of them, by the time they come to us, already have huge adult psychiatric problems that we need to deal with. So we treat that, and then we say, let's treat all the issues that you're undergoing right now, and then let's come back to this aspect post that. So maybe they may think a little rationally post having received treatment, and look at things from a different perspective. But yes, I do tell them that inform family members. If you want to even confront your abuser, do that, if that gives you that outlet. That is something that you should do, and then you come back to me in therapy and tell me what happened, because they don't want to go the legal route at that point of time. Sometimes it's more of getting closure for them than to probably go. So that is my take.
Okay, Avinash,
Dr.
us, why is it that, things get, in the human mind, why is it that it gets suppressed for so long and then it resurfaces, decades later with such a vengeance? What is it about the human mind that can suppress something as heinous as this for so long, and then it comes out, with all the vengeance possible?
See, I think it is the basic uh, shock of the abuse, that happens more than even the trauma or the dissociation. It's the shock that is so hardening that, then there's a stigma, there's a shame, there are multiple things, and at times when it's reported to parents, at that time it's brushed aside. So parents are not receptive and they don't want to sort of help the child at that point of time, so it causes a problem even then. And then it's just hidden, it's just kept, and it's something that is there and it has to come out at some point of time in some way. So it comes out after many years. I mean, I think that happens with any emotional setback that's sort of there within you.
Jason, you have a question. Jason Fernandez, can you ask the question, please, Jason?
Yes, ma'am. This question is for Dr. Avinash. So I am a practicing psychologist in Mumbai,
Yeah,
and I have seen such cases where victims and survivors later on turn into abusers
yeah.
with some amount of grudge and some amount of hatred that what happened to them. Okay, now this should happen to someone else because even they should go through the pain what they have been through. So what is something like what are the changes that happen in the human mind at that time? Is it due to the trauma? Is it due to the anger?
Okay, so remember this, that response to trauma can go both ways. So, let's say I've had a bad teacher who failed me in an exam. I can become a teacher and I decide that I will see that no student fails and no student undergoes that trauma because I went through it. Or I can say, because I underwent it, now I'll fail everyone and give them the same hurt. So that's, I think, the mechanism that is at play here. The changes that happen is I have been abused, so I will abuse, or I have been abused, so I will never let anyone else abuse. So that's what way you want to swing, what way your aggression swings. It's got more of that, and it's more to deal with your response, the hurt you felt. If probably you got the good care at the initial phase, you'll probably go the other way, that I will not let abuse happen. But probably if no one helped you, then that vengeance builds in and it comes out in the form of I. That's why when NGOs hire individuals who've been through abuse to be counselors, we have to be very careful that A, nothing inappropriate happens, and B, that even in therapy, their emotions don't get in the way of their therapy. That is something which is very important.
Maria De
Thank you.
Silva,
Thank you so much.
question. Yes, Sharon, have we got the third speaker on? Miss Lodha, come in. Okay. Maria De Silva asks the question. I think, Sheryl, you can take that question. What when parents don't believe their children and there's no real physical abuse? How does the child prove their story?
So if we are going to look at it from the Pocso angle, okay, because we're discussing Pocso today, and then I'll talk a little bit about the emotional part of it. A child, that's why it's the whole act of Pocso is child friendly and child centric. So, and like we do a lot of sessions with schools and everything. So even if a parent doesn't believe, the child can call the helpline and mention this. So for reporting, it need not be a parent to report. The child himself or herself can report what happened to her or him. Now, from the emotional part of it, many a times parents, like I said, they choose to not believe what happened, and maybe what then the child can do is take the help of another trusted adult. It could be a school teacher, it could be an aunt, and you tell them what happened so they can kind of talk to the parents. But you still don't need the parents' permission to report the act according to Pocso. That's the first thing. And many times, yes, there is no physical abuse. There won't be, wounds or bruises, but there will be inappropriate touching, but all that comes under POCSO. So we're looking at POCSO, any kind of inappropriate, like Avinash was talking about, even if I am showing a pornographic clip to a child and that child is feeling uncomfortable after watching it or seeing it, that comes under POCSO.
Arsal, you have a question. Can I ask you to unmute and please ask your question?
Yeah, Sheryl, can I ask you a question?
Yes, sir.
What are the psychiatric problems these people face? And they suppose say some touch was done, inappropriate touch, and years later or sometime later they come out with psychiatric problems regarding that touch.
Definitely. A lot of trauma, right? And all mental health professionals, when we see adults with depression, anxiety, we see adults with substance abuse, and we ask them about childhood sexual abuse, there would be a majority of them who would say that yes, we experience childhood sexual abuse. They will repress that, they will not talk about it, but those emotions come out as depression and anxiety. They have a fear of relationships, because most of the time these abuse happens with somebody close to them, somebody in position to actually protect them. So they form very poor interpersonal relationships as they're growing up. They don't trust people very easily. They have very poor sexual relationships even with their spouses. They're unable, if the sexual abuse has been bad, they're unable to indulge in sexual activities as they become adults. So significant amount of mental health trauma to children as they grow up with sexual abuse.
Why they keep on thinking about it all the time? It's not
Yes,
forgotten.
they know it's not forgotten. They'll always
Then how?
remember and come up in different ways. So there are a lot of ways that we help them. If they come, we help them to process the trauma. We can't take away what happened. But through therapy and through help of medications, we help them to recover from their depression, anxiety. And we always tell them we cannot help you to forget what happened because it's a memory. So we're not going to be striving to forget what happened, but we'll help you to process those emotions and what happened. There are various techniques in therapy known as EMDR and other things where we help them to process the trauma.
Dr. Avinash, may I ask a question, please?
Yes.
Dr. Avinash, what is the difference between the POSCO Act, what is being mentioned, and POCSO? There are two different, as in POCSO is what is being spoken about, and there's also POSCO as well. So what's the difference?
Pardon, just can you come again?
Yeah, so Doctor, what is the difference between the POCSO Act and the POSCO Act? There are two acts, I think.
No, there's one act only. It's the POCSO Act. There's nothing like POSCO. Huh? There is POSH, which is prevention of sexual harassment, which is different. And POCSO is child sexual offenses, which is what we're talking about.
Okay, no, because when I checked on Google, it shows me two different acts. As in, it says
No.
and
POSCO is, people mispronounce POCSO and they call it POSCO by mistake, but
okay.
Nothing else. Yeah.
Thank you for the clarification.
Sharon, do we have a third speaker on?
Sorry. It is protection of children against sexual offenses. So that's why it's POCSO.
I live in Mumbai. My mom has one question in Hindi.
Please go ahead.
जी पूछिए.
जी मैं मुंबई से बोल रही हूँ और कलकत्ता वाला जो मैटर हुआ आज सब लोग एक्शन ले रहा है, लेकिन संजय राय की तरह जितने भी नीचे कर्मचारी या नर्स या उस तरह के छोटे पोस्ट पर जितने लोग भी हैं, मेरे सीनियर डॉक्टर या जूनियर डॉक्टर के सामने वो लोग पेशेंट पर हाथ छोड़ देते हैं या चिल्ला के बोलते हैं, जबकि मेरे सीनियर डॉक्टर से 10 बार भी कोई सवाल करो तो सीनियर डॉक्टर मेरे एक बार भी ऊंचे जवाब में नहीं मैंने बोलते हैं. तो ये चीज के लिए हॉस्पिटल में सीनियर डॉक्टर है, उसको एक्शन लेना चाहिए. आज मैंने वहाँ हुआ है तो एक्शन है, और जहाँ हो रहा है उसके लिए कोई ये नहीं है. हॉस्पिटल में तो सबसे बड़े मेरे डॉक्टर ही ना है, उसके बाद ही उनका पोस्ट है। तो मेरे डॉक्टर चिल्ला के नहीं बोलते हैं, लेकिन नर्स बम्बई में साइन है या जे है या भावा है, वो सीनियर डॉक्टर के सामने हाथ छोड़ देती है लोग।
हाँ जो
मदन,
तो ये जो बात है शायद गलत ही हो रहा है। तो जब ऐसा कुछ होता है आपके साथ, तो आपको ये जरूरी है कि इमीडिएटली जो भी वहां पर सीनियर पर्सन है, आप उनको ये रिपोर्ट कीजिए और बताइए कि ये हमारे साथ हुआ है। आई थिंक प्रज्ञा हैज ज्वाइंड इन मैम।
मिस
मैम
लोधा,
लेकिन वहां तक
मिस
वहां
लोधा,
तक तो मेरे
बेटा एक मिनट ठहर जाइए. डू वी हैव प्रज्ञा लोधा हियर, प्लीज?
Yes, ma'am, I'm here.
Okay, welcome to the program. I think you had a problem logging in, Pragya. I have introduced you, so we won't waste too much of time. We'll ask you to get on with the session, please.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you everyone for waiting along. Sorry for the technical glitch, but I'm glad that we've been able to connect. Without, I think, much ado, I will begin. And I think after you all have heard Dr. Avinash and Dr. Sheryl, I'm going to cover the last bit on child sexual abuse, which essentially is the management of trauma that is related to child sexual abuse. As Gabermaid actually puts it as a psychotherapist and a psychosocial worker, that trauma is an invisible force that shapes our lives. It shapes the way how we live, it shapes the way how we love, and it shapes the way how we see the world. Trauma is a subjective experience that we all have as individuals, each one of us having our own individualistic experience. And in our own ways, we get impacted by various factors that
Yeah, I
affect
think you
us
have to
in various.
share your slides. I mean, are you sharing your slides?
So sadly, I'm unable to. Sorry, I forgot to
Okay,
notify. I'm unable
okay, no
to
problem, no problem. Please
share
go ahead.
because I'm joining from the phone.
Please go ahead. Please go ahead. No.
Thank you. Like I was saying that trauma is an individualistic experience that affects individuals in many and different ways, and no two people experience trauma in a similar way, including the same holds true for children as well. One thing that is most important to understand whenever we are talking about management of trauma and child sexual abuse is the fact that whenever we are addressing any sort of trauma is never a singled out event. It is never a standalone event coming from one source of event or one source of trauma that we are talking about. But there are various factors that do lead to trauma and that have probably previously existed as well, which most often we are unable to account for when we are looking at managing or any sort of interventions for trauma. When we're talking about trauma as an experience in children, most often there are various factors that we need to keep in mind while we are managing trauma in child sexual abuse as well, which can range from anywhere between emotional neglect, abuse, emotional abuse, that is any sort of family violence or history of mental health issues or history of conflict that would have been present in the family, either between parents or other family members, to various incidences of bullying and cyberbullying at the school, any sort of issues with friends that we look at in terms of peer pressure, issues related to romantic relationships, and some issues that might be slightly more on the extreme side, which include discrimination, violence, or any sort of other abusive experiences. The presence of other traumatic experiences, which could be both either small traumas or big traumas, further exacerbates the way how the child experiences child sexual trauma. Child sexual abuse is not just a criminal act, but it's also psychologically and emotionally an equally harming act, which does not only affect the child in the then frame of time, but it continues to have a lingering impact on the child's psyche as the child grows and continues to grow across the years and decades to come. A defining factor in the way how individuals are affected by traumatic experience is their socio-cultural conditioning. I think most often when we talk about, understanding trauma or management of trauma, we most often look at trauma from a Western lens which has been established for us. Most of us, as doctors or psychologists or people working in the healthcare department, we read and learn about trauma intervention from a Western perspective. That is, people from the West who have established models of intervention and managing trauma, which aren't wrong. But something which is a big miss is the socio-cultural adaptation, which is very important in understanding trauma. Because how we look at trauma as a phenomenon in Indian or even Asian cultures for that matter is very different from how trauma is looked at and understood in an American or a European perspective. A very small example that I will, use to demonstrate that how our emotional experiences can culturally vary so much. There was an incident where I was talking to one of the therapists who works in the USA, and she said that at their health clinic they have a practice of waiting for 48 hours. If someone gets in touch with them, they wait for 48 hours and then give them an appointment. In one of the cases where there was a 27-year-old male who got in touch for an appointment, rather than waiting for 48 hours, she decided that, okay, one day has passed and I should maybe, in the next half of the next second day, I can probably leave a message to just ask, if he wants to confirm his appointment to come in the following week. And when she did so, it so happened that in the following 2 days, the boy landed up at the clinic and, went straight up to the desk and said that, I don't appreciate how aggressively your therapist texted me and asked me that if I wanted to come in less than 48 hours. This was such a small nuance of, behavior of just confirming an appointment, which most often we wouldn't really even think of as aggression. Right. And this is, I think, what really helps us to understand that how socio-cultural factors are extremely important in the way how we experience any sort of emotional or psychological phenomenon. Because whenever we say that, any experience, including that of trauma, is subjective and individualistic, like, how we talk about stress, that, what may be stressful for me may not be stressful for you, and what may be stressful for you may not be stressful for me. The similar holds true for trauma as an experience as well. And as we move on and talk about specifically that, when we look at children who are at the expense of receiving this kind of trauma as victims of abuse, it's very important that, we as a society come together, no matter whether we are parents, we're teachers, we're, policy makers, or we are health professionals, irrespective medical or mental health professional. It's very important for all of us to keep one thing in mind is that children think and feel very differently than adults. Most experiences that can be very clearly narrated by individuals who are adults may not be able to be put in as many clear words when it comes to the younger population. Most often, we also see that, children go mute or they are unable to talk about the topic directly. They may go in circles. They may show behavioral signs where they stop eating, they stop going to school, they don't show any interest in meeting their friends. And there can be various ways of us knowing that how the child is actually talking about the fact that he or she may have experienced abuse. When we look at the child population, it's also, I think, important to address the specific needs according to the child. For example, the way how trauma is experienced for somebody who's 10 years old will be very different for somebody who's 16 years old, versus will again be very different for someone who's 5 years old within the early growing periods of childhood to teenage as well. Another whole section of children that we look at and that we need to also keep in mind is, children with special needs. And because they are children who are far more dependent and far more vulnerable, because they are not as equipped as their other peers who do not have these neurodevelopmental or developmental disabilities. Overall, one of the most important myth to debunk about children's mental health is to acknowledge that children's mental health problems are real. Most often, children's problems or children talking about what they like, what they don't like, what makes them comfortable, what makes them uncomfortable is very casually dismissed by the simple statements that, Are ye to bacha hai? How does he or she really no. It's very important that we do heed to the child no matter what the complaint is, and always give it benefit of doubt. We can always inquire, we can always know more to confirm what the child is really saying. It's important that we also remember that children make sense of everything. They may or may not really understand, they may or may not really communicate exactly the way how adults do, but they have their own way of understanding trauma and communicating how they are uncomfortable, which may not necessarily be in verbal ways, but a lot of it also lies in non-verbal and behavioral cues. Just like how we see the impact of trauma in adults in various aspects, such as physical, emotional, behavioral, interpersonal, and social aspects of life. Similarly, in children also, we see that there is a multifaceted impact of trauma as a result of the child sexual abuse that continues to remain with them throughout their growing up years. As we look at literature, we also realize that the way how the lingering impact of trauma due to child sexual abuse keeps changing as the child grows as well. There are different signs, indicators, and markers of child sexual abuse that we all need to equip ourselves to learn how to better manage trauma amongst such children. We will look at some direct pointers at what are some things that we all can do to manage trauma in children. And the first thing that we begin with is to actually understand that what does trauma mean for the child. Every child may have a different way of expressing how they feel about the incident that has happened and how it has affected or impacted them at an emotional level, at a physical level, at a behavioral level. And they all will, again, like some children may be very communicative and may talk very directly. Some children may not talk very directly, may just simply say that, how they don't feel like doing their diurnal chores anyway. And that's where we know that if this is a continued form of behavior, we need to inquire. Most often, children do not and are unable to come up and talk about these incidents comfortably and directly, because sadly, this is also a failing of our society where we haven't been able to come together to make far more safer and comfortable environments for our children to be able to talk about such a grave emotional experience. And this is what brings me to the second point, that whenever we talk about management of any sort of trauma, one of the very beautiful phrases that I pick up from one of my seniors is where she says that it takes a village to support somebody who experiences trauma, especially child sexual abuse, which may have been, and again, child sexual abuse may have been a single one-time incident, or it may have been a recurring incident. Irrespective of how or what the frequency of the incident has been, it remains a grave problem to be addressed, and it requires all stakeholders to come together and do their bit, where parents, health practitioners, therapists, academicians, teachers, we all come in together to do our little bit so that we're able to provide a safe and supportive environment to the child. The best way and the only way to be able to manage trauma effectively is to be able to know and identify what trauma really looks like. And this partly comes from directly talking to the child and understanding how the child is impacted. And secondly, is by also updating our information and knowledge, talking to health professionals, talking to social workers, or going up and actually reading about these things which are a part of a child's development. Most often, whenever we don't really pay a lot of heed to understanding experiences unless and until we really hear about it, or a bad incident has happened with someone we know. But we shouldn't wait, and one of the most important things that we talk about child sexual abuse or trauma is the fact that we can really prevent it. So if we know how to identify markers better, it helps us to manage trauma a lot more effectively. Markers of trauma, as I mentioned earlier, will be different for different age groups of children, right from a preschooler to a child who goes to high school, to a child who is an early teenager and then becomes a teenager. There are differences in the way how trauma manifests at various levels. And that is something that we need to equip ourselves with, depending with how old is the child that we are working with. Respecting children's perspectives and respecting children's opinions, what children say, how they express themselves is very important, because that's not just something that helps them feel that we trust them, but it also allows us to then think further and accept that, okay, if this is what my child is telling me, this is the next step that I need to do. It also builds faith in the process of managing the trauma a lot more effectively. A very common stance that comes up whenever we are talking about child sexual abuse and management of child sexual abuse and its impact on children is the question of justice versus well-being. Most often we're thinking about, that of course it is an act of crime and it needs to be reported. However, it's also important that we keep in mind the well-being of the child and ensure that the child feels comfortable enough, and the safety, well-being, and the security of the child is not compromised in the legal process or proceedings that happen. Some very diurnal things that we have to do at a very fundamental daily level is that we have to reinstate and rebuild their routines, right from eating, sleeping patterns, going out for play, meeting their friends, going back to academia. These are all things that take time for the child to readapt to, and it requires various people to be a part of the entire process so that we can help the child in each stage as the child moves back to rehabilitating himself or herself. As we talk about management of trauma, it's definitely important that we address that what are some things that we should definitely not do. We shouldn't and we need to in our capacity, unless and until it's part of the legal proceeding or the medical proceeding and it's really necessary, we do not need to ask the details of the events of what happened. Most often it's a very common and it's a very habitual way for people to ask that, "Arey kya hua tha?" So what happened? We don't need to really know to manage trauma or the emotional traumatic response when CSA has taken place. Second, we don't need to get upset at the child for not telling us earlier, because it takes a lot of courage and a lot of, confidence in a way for a child to actually come and trust even a known person after such an act to come and tell them that something like this has happened with them. It's very important that we also remember that we don't challenge them or we don't question them, right? We try and believe them whatever information they are giving us. No matter how young the child is, no matter how naive or immature the child is, we listen and we respectfully listen to what the child has to say. Last and the worst thing that we can tell anybody, including a child, is to actually forget about the event, right? If it were that easy, I don't think we would really have to manage trauma at the end of it. So, asking the person to snap out of it or forget about it is one of the worst things that we can tell them. Most often, management for trauma, emotional, psychological trauma that lingers around post child sexual abuse requires long-term support, in the sense that it does keep requiring time-to-time intervention, because like how we said time and again, that manifestation of trauma keeps changing as the child grows, and there are different difficulties that come at each stage of development for a child, right from the young childhood to adulthood. There is a talk acronym that we most often use when we talk about that. How do we talk to a child who has experienced child sexual abuse and we are managing, the lingering effects of that incident? T stands for thank them for telling you. It's very important that we engage in these small gestures, because it is these small things that help the child feel reassured. It helps the child feel that he or she can actually come and trust you, and it also helps to build security and safety, which are some of the most important emotions for the child to feel following on the incident. So T stands for thank them for telling you. A, ask how can you help. Most often, something when we do when we are talking to people who we love, we most often engage in giving them suggestions. We tell them, "Arey, do this, do that. Did you do this? Abhi tak ye nahi kiya kya?" No, ask them, how would you like to be helped? Now, most often a child may not be able to clearly state how they want to be helped, but you can still ask them. You can ask them questions like, would you be comfortable if I did this for you? Would you be okay if I came with you? And sometimes also directly telling them that you can feel safe here, you can be with me. So some statements of reassurance that help them, that help is available for them and that they can access help. L stands for listen without judgment. So no matter what has happened, no matter what the child is saying, we believe the child and we listen to the child non-judgmentally, and then offer the help that we can in the best possible way. K starts for keep supporting. So keep supporting and keep providing support and care as much as possible, because this is an intervention that needs to be taken place, and it requires efficacious management across a long period of time, as and when the trauma manifests with time. One of the most important things I think to remember, which I also take as a big learning as a therapist whenever we are working with trauma, is a lot of times our own expectations of health practitioners, of therapists, comes in the way where we expect that, why is this child not getting better? Why is this person not getting better? I've done so much, I've put in so much of work. It's very important that we remind ourselves and also accept the fact that some people may need long term support, and that's absolutely okay. So, lastly, I end with simply saying that as we work towards managing the trauma as part of CSA among people, among children, and among adults who've also had experiences of CSA, it's important that we learn how to take care of ourselves as well, because self care is an ethical imperative. If I do not take care of myself, I will not be able to take care of people as well. So, with that, I take a pause and I leave room for questions if there are any. Uh, yes, I'm saying L stands for listen without judgment.
Thank you so much, Ms. Lodha. That was an excellent presentation. Thank you. I keep this as an open question and invite questions from the floor as well. What if the perpetrator of child sexual abuse happens to be a child and a child of the same sex? If it's a girl child who's, say, 7 or 8 years old, and the perpetrator is, say, a 12 and a half or 13 or 14-year-old child of the same school, what happens then? Can one report under POSCO?
Most often what we do is, I think, the inquiry takes to talk to both the children independently, individually, and to understand what is the purpose, or, how did they engage. Like, so if we're talking about the child who may be the perpetrator, the inquiry also involves, so the police personnel along with the psychologists interact with the child to also understand that what led him or her to engage in the act that they did. Right. I think it still has to be reported under POCSO. That is, I think, it remains imperative as an act, especially when it comes from a legal standpoint. But what makes a difference is the kind of inquiry and the kind of engagement that happens to understand as to what led. Because it's also important, I think, to make a demarcation between that what may sometimes be, because a very common developmental milestone that happens between same-sex children, sometimes even when they are siblings, is a very normal and healthy exploration. So how do we define abuse, and what are the signs of abuse that we're looking at, is looked into. And if that has been established, I mean, irrespective, the reporting does happen under POCSO. There is, of course, I think, a juvenile
Yeah.
court to take into, I mean, and of course, the rehabilitation looks very different as compared to what we look at when the perpetrator is 18 and above.
Is there any question from the audience? Are there any questions from the
Lodha,
audience?
Miss Lodha, can I ask a question, please? How often there's reconciliation of the phenomenon? somebody comes to you with the problem that they had a sexual harassment or issues like that, offenses, and they are affected, and then you try to counsel them. Is there reconciliation?
Reconciliation from what standpoint? I mean, with the perpetrator?
Yeah.
Most often, I think that does not end up happening because unless and until it is something which may be forced. But I've never heard where there is any sort of reconciliation, unless and until, of course, there are cases where there is, when there is a family member involved, it is something which is most often looked as a suggestion. But the person themselves most often never feel comfortable reconciling with the person. They may choose to sometimes, as they grow up, they may choose to not interact with them, avoid social or familial situations, to not, sort of go and talk to them. In fact, I think from whatever I can tell from my experiences, that most often people only say that, even I think it might sound a little discomfort, but those people who experienced abuse and perpetrators are family members or people they know, they most often feel a sense of relief and a sense of also some sort of absolving when the perpetrator actually, let's say for example, leaves the country away forever, or even sometimes as a matter of death. Like most often they say that they realize that yes, I feel sad that this person has passed away, but I do not feel enough because what they did to me, I can never forget that. So because the negative memories are so strong, it's difficult for the person to reconcile with the perpetrator.
Dr. Anukant,
In
you
most
being a
cases,
senior man, okay,
sorry.
go ahead. You wanted to say something.
No, I think another thing which we see, which is not most often reconciliation, is something which is called as a trauma bond, which we see when the person has a fawning reaction in trauma. So that is where what the person does is that the victim feels that, befriending the perpetrator in some way will actually help to, protect themselves. But that really is not something that happens for a long term, because the moment the person who's been at the receiving end of abuse will also, take any sort of help, or they resort for some sort of help, they are able to process their emotional struggles at that place, and they no more feel the need to do so, because with taking therapeutic help also a certain amount of awareness steps in for people to know what they can do to even support themselves without having to necessarily rely on befriending the perpetrator.
Dr. Anukant, may I ask your opinion on this? Dr. Anukant.
I think Anukant is not there. I don't think he's there just now, Dr.
What
Nikhil.
about Avinash? Avinash?
Yes. Hello.
Yeah. Hi. Yeah. Okay. Can I, Avinash?
Yeah,
Can
please.
I have?
Yeah.
Right. I think your use of the word reconciliation is very ambiguous, Dr. Antao.
Okay.
Do you mean to say if the victim marries the perpetrator or something like that, then that doesn't matter? That is old age myth that you could rape a girl or you could have sexually abused a child and then offer to marry them to get away with the sentence. So the law, once the case is registered, does not consider that in any way as restitution or whatever reconciliation. The second part about reconciliation, as Dr. Pragya said, is the child definitely feels more secure once law has taken its course and booked the perpetrator, especially if he is a dominant member of the family. Right? If he's one of the, in a patriarchal family or in a dominant family, if he is one of the power holders and has been reprimanded and has been taken into custody or a case has been filed, the child feels a lot of relief and safety, and that as Dr. Pragya said, that the child feels free and vindicated a lot because they're under a lot of stress not to register the case or not to mention the act in case some adverse events happen. So I think that is one thing that we have to remember.
Why I'm
The
saying
third
this
point.
is, yeah,
Please go ahead.
go ahead. Third thing.
The third thing is that with this Pocso Act, I've had cases in the past where the child has been abused by somebody powerful and in the school who has links with the trustees or the owners of the school, and the parents have brought the child to me, and as I'm dealing with the child, the school counselor or the school teachers or seniors call me up and say, oh, no need to follow up. We are following it up. We have appointed a counselor and that counselor will take care of it. It is after 5 years when the child comes back to me after having left the school and joined a college with trauma still ongoing that I am told that no action was taken. So the Pocso Act now makes it compulsory and obligatory on the school to file a complaint even when the parents don't want it. So that means just because the perpetrator is somebody from the family or somebody known to the family contacts does not help them escape and get away. So that is one of the major important factors of Pocso. Do you agree, Avinash?
Yes, sir, I totally agree. I feel that, I don't think in probably over hundreds of cases of child abuse that I've seen any reconciliation ever happens. It never happens. In fact, I think it doesn't happen for rape also nowadays. It's very, very rare because the laws are so clear right now that, the perpetrator has to be punished. So that's what we are. I think rather what does happen is that there may be times when uh, children or parents midway sort of withdraw a case, sometimes only if there's a huge compensation that the child gets. This is what I've seen, and this primarily only happens if someone, as you said, in a position of power doesn't want his or her name to get spoiled or something to happen. Then a very huge compensation is sometimes offered to the child, which the parents can't refuse from the child's future point of view. But still, I think any decent parent would not look at money when it comes to the child's justice. I think
May I make a comment over here, please? I think
Yes.
my rest in, peace forever if I would have another P to the POSCO, the primary protection. Because once the deed is done, you have damaged goods really almost for a lifetime. Insomnia, mental health issues, addictions, eating disorders, attempted suicide, the whole gamut of children who've been abused as children. They appear normal for a couple of years and then they fall through the system with mental health issues. I believe primary protection is our duty as a society. And I think, like the medical profession, no male doctor would ever examine or dream of examining a lady patient without there being a chaperone or an assistant over there. Why is it we cannot push for more CCTV coverages in schools, in open places where, say, not the stalls in the toilets of the children, but in the more open areas? That's where the abuse happens. Sleepovers also to be discouraged, and anybody who's in charge of children to sign a disclaimer or to sign a thing that they would have their registration cancelled. They would have to have severe terms where it is a lifelong problem that they'd have to deal with, because it is such a damaging incident to a child's life. I really would be very happy if we could push the debate at every level of law, of the police, of everywhere, where there's primary protection to children, rather than a child having to go through it and then report it.
Completely agree, ma'am. And
no,
I think
I agree with. Oh, Sheryl, please go ahead. Please go ahead. Yeah.
yeah, I completely agree. And that's why we want to kind of, the whole the first step is prevention, right? And for prevention, awareness in schools, right from the time the kid is small, about good touch, not good touch, actually about bad touch. There's nothing known as good touch. How do they understand when they're uncomfortable? Parents to understand that, don't ask, go let this uncle kiss you on your cheek, kiss on the lip. Like I said, go and sit on this uncle's lap. Even if it's grandparents, go and sit on somebody's lap. If the child is uncomfortable, please do not encourage it. You can have so many ways of, because then the child is confused. I can kiss somebody on my lips, but this uncle cannot kiss me on my lip. Or I can sit on somebody's lap and I can't sit on my neighbor's lap. So be very, very clear when we are talking to children about how to understand how to protect their body right from the time they are small children. There, and name it for what it is. So when we start in our homes, because yes, CCTV camera in school or in public places works, but if you look at the statistics, majority of children are getting sexual abuse at home with people known to them. So, educating the children right from the younger age, parents to be aware that this is a very, very serious problem and don't undermine it, right? And be very, very, like you said, no allowing children to go to a friend's house where you don't know the family. There could be an uncle, some mama, some kaka who's staying there. You're thinking, oh, I know the family very well. Go talk to your child every time the child goes and comes back about, did something go wrong? I mean, almost to the point of being paranoid. You have to kind of inculcate that alertness in the child and you as parents, and of course in schools to keep on talking about this. Yeah,
I
Avinash.
think just one small thing to add. I think Dr. Sheryl brought out a very important point. And I think a lot of just basic mental health boils down to this, that most of the time, like, and this is not just to put the burden on the parents, right? But because parents are also such a big community, and especially when we're talking about, any sort of abuse in children, they are the primary, caretakers, the primary people to intervene. Most often basic communication doesn't happen, especially I think in a scenario where parents are working. It's actually I mean, I don't know how would we describe it, but there are also incidences in school where there are one set of parents who are extremely aware and extremely sensitive about, there are incidences where it recently happened in a school where, a 3-year-old child came back with a rash, and the parents sort of, panicked that it could be an incident of abuse, and they reported the school, only to find out that it was possibly just a diaper rash that, came up, because it was also like, in the genital area. The first thing that comes to parents is that, and I think in such cases some sort of awareness, and even if it means that we have a slightly bloated reaction, it's sometimes better than not having a reaction or no communication, because at least there's scope of intervention and something that can be done. So I think it's really important for the basic communication, and if communication happened on a daily level beyond what happened in school and how our academics and what are the 10 other classes that the child has to go, if we just sat and spoke about how the child feels and how the child is going on, on a daily basis, it would really make a very big difference in the way how children grew up, and eventually, of course, the society grows up as well. So thank you, Dr. Sheryl, for bringing that up.
I think Jason has a question. Jason?
Yeah, I would like to bring something out is I feel we should also monitor our children when they are getting more gifts from somewhere, more sweets from somewhere. Okay, because sometimes with I have seen cases where the grooming of the child is done very well. The grooming is done so well that the child doesn't even know that she's being abused. So as parents, we have to see that what our child is bringing every day at home. Okay, keep a constant look, like if there are expensive video games or maybe Barbie dolls or whatever it is. Okay, maybe as a parent you would not give it to your child because it's expensive, but someone else is giving it to your child. Okay, or there is a person where your child is going to very frequently. Okay, so these things also should be kept in mind. And as Dr. Sheryl also said, like, stop making the child passing the parcel from one lab to another lab, that is actually really ridiculous. And no matter how close you are to that person, the child is always confused. He's curious. He needs to be stable. He needs to understand that, okay, this person is bad or this person is good. Sometimes it could be just a crease or just a fondle which could later on lead to trauma.
Thank you for that question, Dr. Jason. Anyone else has some questions? We're in the question answer session of
No,
this.
I have a point to make here that another very important variation of the POXO Act comes into play when in a special school, if you have a 14 or a 15-year-old child with intellectual impairment who sometimes tries to sexually sort of touch a smaller child who also has intellectual impairment. Now the thing is that you're dealing with two special children, and this is something where uh, the special child is sort of just giving vent to natural urges that have come. He's and It's inappropriate touching, I agree, but you know he can't obviously be put into a juvenile detention center for this. And this is what we tell parents, that both the children are special. We have to understand the cognition of both children, that it's not something that is being done with the purpose of committing a child sexual offense. So there are times when we have to protect both the smaller child and the older child, because both, and the older child is autistic and has no speech, whereas the younger child is intellectually impaired and has speech. But the older child gets the urge, he just goes and tries to push himself on the younger child. Teachers see him, they separate, but the younger child goes home, tells the parents come and say child sexual abuse. No, it's not child sexual abuse. The context of the situation also sometimes needs to be looked into in these cases. So this is something which is very, very important. One very important thing is, when it comes to touch, we even train bus drivers and bus attendants how they are supposed to lift a child and put the child in the bus, so that while lifting the child, you don't touch the buttocks or you don't touch the thighs. It has to be done in a proper manner. So, and international guidelines on this are there. So they are actually trained on how, when you pick up, see, the bus stops at home, they're in a hurry, there are three children waiting, so the bus attendant picks up three children, one, two, three, and puts them inside the bus, smaller children. So even how do you pick up the child is very important. Or we say the lady attendant will pick up the child, not the male attendant. So these kind of small things also have to be looked at in a school setting.
Very true. So training of class 3, class 4, the didis in the school, the watchmen in the school, the bus drivers should be the owners of the school. So, and I think it should be mandatory that, how you have teacher training program and everything, a very, very strict training about this and about the act. So people are they know that there's a deterrent, that this is what's going to happen. Especially, for example, when we're looking at, let's say, somebody from the school who's the perpetrator of the crime, then it's aggravated sexual assault. So the punishment also will be much, much more. So at least we make them aware right from the beginning when they join in, that this could be the consequence. It could help in kind of reducing the crime.
Can I add here something? Hello?
Absolutely. Go ahead.
Yeah. I'm kind of surprised we're talking only about school. Adult child interaction on a routine basis happens in many other places, and which are much more open and much more secretive than schools. Playgrounds, gyms, coaching centers for children, coaching classes for children. Lots of these places. I mean, I have a few national level and Olympial athletes who have, in the course of talking with me have discussed the times where they were improperly touched or improperly into relationships with their coaches when they were juveniles. I've had a lot of children brought in who were improperly touched in playgrounds or in the gym when they went for their gym coaching. So school, I believe, is a more what you call closely observed and closed area as compared to, as Avinash mentioned, school buses. The other open spaces where children interact with adults, where there's a lot of power involved. Like these athletes that I'm walking with, their coaches and their trainers and their selectors had a lot to do with their careers. And from an early age, these children, as Dr. Pragya said, they have learned to fawn. They have learned to acquiesce to their perpetuators so that they get the advantage or they're not harmed. And that is why it is very important that parents and medical professionals and others keep track and they follow up with close questioning of such vulnerable children as to what is happening. And that is one important aspect in preventing more serious aggravated assault or abuse. Am I right, Avinash and Pragya?
Pragya, you go first.
No, certainly, sir. I think I agree. And, it's very common when it comes to any sort of, multiple stories that we hear from adults also who talk about such experiences happening in their coaching classes, even I think houses of relatives. So I think the idea of safe space is something that has to expand, and that's the reason why we need as stakeholders, we're an entire community. It's not the burden of management is not just on one. And I think prevention is the best way of going ahead. So the better we know, the better we're together, the better we're able to take care of this. Because as you said that inquiry is needed not just for the children who are vulnerable, but any child can be vulnerable at any point. And I think keeping that in mind, it needs that, we're always on our toes as far as the child is, like not capable to take care of themselves. So absolutely in agreement with you, sir. Thank you for adding that point.
I think
Yes,
Larry,
I think I agree
Larry
with.
was one of the examples. Yeah. The US coach Larry Nazar was an example of the children being groomed over there, and a lot of them kept silent for many years before it all blew out of proportion. Then
Yeah, there was this famous case 5 years ago in England of more than 30 Asian and white men being arrested. They were catching these girls from poverty-stricken areas and poorer residential areas and grooming them. And under the premise of grooming them, they were actually sexually abusing them. And this whole racket blew up when somebody conducted a safe sex, safe touch, bad touch, good touch class in some of the schools in the county, in that area. And suddenly all these complaints about these people started coming in. And these were not people associated with their schools. These were people who were hanging around the schools. There were people on the roads, people who were forming groups. And they used to take these girls in and under the guise of grooming them, would actually abuse them. Yeah, so that is there. Right. I think if you are finished with Susan, you would like to sum up or something?
I think we've had a very interesting session. The topic has been well covered by Dr. Avinash, Dr. Sheryl, and Dr. Lodha. Thank you so much for the insightful presentations that you'll have given, an in-depth perspective of the topic. And thank you, Dr. Nicholas Anta, for arranging the session, and Dr. Anukan Mital for co-chairing over here the session. And the audience who've been here throughout the whole session, I hope you have had an interesting academic meet, and I hope children all over the country and in the world are protected. They are all our responsibility. Most important, at the center of it is the child. Thank you so much, and good night, and God bless.
And we must thank Dr. Susan for beautifully moderating the sessions, asking intelligent questions, introducing the speakers in an encouraging attitude. We appreciate all the efforts that you have put in, and that made the webinar on Pocso so effective and understanding. Thank you.
Thank you. Good night,
Thank
everyone.
you.